Are we good? Okay. It is July 25th, 2023. This is the regular Moab City Council meeting. I will call this meeting to order at 6:01 p.m. Shar, could I get you to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Thank you and welcome, everyone. It's been so long since we had a meeting. I don't know if we need to reintroduce ourselves or not. But it's kind of nice to be back here. And we'll just move on to the first item on our agenda. This is a workshop on our water efficient landscaping ordinance number 2023-08. That's going to be facilitated by Alexi and by Corey, who will join us via Zoom. So I will just turn the time over to you guys. And I do need to remind everybody that we have invited guests that will be here about 7. And so we need to be respectful of their time. So the mayor said, let's try and wrap this up within that hour. If we need to do another workshop, because this is a big ordinance, that's okay.
All right, that sounds good. What our plan is today is Corey and I are going to kind of frame up where this all came from and what we've done since you've seen it last. And then we'll go to the text and also be able to answer questions. Let's see. Okay, so we're going to start with the rationale for it, move through the timeline and the outreach that we've done for this, review what we are replacing with this, the existing code, and do an outline of our proposed update, and then we'll move into actually the text. This started with some things that Mila, my predecessor, had a grant and started working through this. It fulfills or implements the city's goals in our water conservation plan, which was passed in 2021. It limits turf grass, includes gray water systems. It also develops a required species list. So it fulfills a number of the things that were in that plan, and also follows through on some things in the Moab general plan, incentivizing green stormwater infrastructure for effective stormwater management. It improves landscapes in general within the community for not just being water efficient, but also looking at urban heat island effect, soil erosion, preventing that, and some other aspects of our landscapes that could benefit from the landscape ordinance. And it also does look at climate appropriate vegetation and providing shade. A bonus that we had not originally planned on, but has come about at the state level, is the state is implementing a turf buyback program. And if we implement an ordinance that meets the criteria, and this one would, then residents in Moab would then qualify for the turf buyback program. So this started in August of 2021 with a Project Accelerator to work on updating the current code, and then moved into getting feedback from the Planning Commission and the City Council on starting to pull everything together. And then we did some workshops with the Planning Commission, specifically on screening and buffering, and another one that was on general standards, which will encompass more of the water efficiency aspects of the code update. And then it went to Planning Commission for a public hearing, and we collected public feedback. Our feedback efforts, some of these have been different things that the city has been available to answer questions, stories that have been picked up in the paper, that we've contributed to in some way, or that have been out there in such a way that people would know that this was going on. So it's been covered in the Moab Times Independent. It's also been in the Moab Sun News. It's been in the City Spotlight newsletter. We did a couple of events where we were at tables to talk to people as they came by. We also put out a survey, and I had an article in the Moab Happenings. And also we're on This Week in Moab on KZMU. A brief summary of some of the things that we heard. This is specifically from the survey. I think it covers a lot of the things that we were hearing from people. The survey was started by 47 people, finished by 26. I tried to show this question with as many people as finished it, which I believe was 42. So 90% of the people who completed it live in Moab. It was 5 questions long and it took people about 3 minutes to complete. We asked people what was most important to them about the landscape. Water conservation, native vegetation, food production were among the top, but you can see a lot of things were important to people. A few of the things that we didn't specifically ask about that people also mentioned include functionality, everything, fire prevention, and not being told what to plant. And then we also asked people some questions about how satisfied they were about each of those things. I'm giving you the summary of the entire code. This is what people told us. It was unclear which people had actually read the ordinance prior to this and which ones had comments to make and wanted to complete the survey in order to make comments. Some of the things that came up with people who said they were dissatisfied, where they wanted dust management to be included, heat reduction, and food production. We did try to address these. Dust management will come up in our required vegetation. Heat reduction with trees and food production is actually exempt from this ordinance, so people can plant food outside of the specific water conservation requirements of this ordinance. Some of the comments that we received, people did not want to be penalized because a new development needs water. They wanted shade trees and were concerned about landscape maintenance. And then we have some others in here that I think some of these are being addressed. The city of Moab is working on saving water. Native plants are addressed in a few different ways, which we will go over. We do address stormwater, although not with specifically curb cuts. And we will talk a little bit about artificial plants. Secondary water for irrigation is included in the water budget, and industrial properties. I think in this particular case, there were some misunderstandings about what it would do in terms of how much landscape it would require in order to, I think there's miscommunication about how much would be set aside for landscape versus among the things that you have landscaped, what you should do. Going to the existing code, what we have right now is in the supplementary requirements and procedures applicable within zones. And then it's within that, we would be adding something within 1709, which we'll get to. And what we would also do is add below that a section 1710, that would be landscaping standards. And that section would break out the piece that is already there and then create the section that includes just landscaping standards. Within this section, this is what we currently have, just as a reminder. So if you go into 1709, this is the section that you would find on landscaping. And then there are 2 slides here that show the entirety of the existing code. Some of these things are being pulled over, although we consider it more of a replacement of it because there's so much more in the new code that you'll be able to find specifically some of these pieces in it, but there's just a lot more. So including 70% of the area on the front or side adjacent yard to a street, that continues to move over. We include the purpose. We also include where landscaping is required and that they need to be maintained. All those things kind of roll into the new one. And then this is the rest of what the code currently exists. And this is pretty much replaced because we did get more extensive with screening and what types of screening you would need in which situations. There is a plot plan required in the new code, but it's more extensive in terms of defining what kinds of things you would turn in to show your plot. And the non-conforming status does continue in the new one, but there's also a lot more details about what that means and then who's exempt or what kinds of exceptions there are. So that's the entirety of the existing code. The new code follows an outline like this. We added some definitions that are specific to landscape. And then on the 1709 section, the piece that we would add would have special water standards that would include WaterSense labeled fixtures for the interior and Energy Star qualified appliances. And this was at a request from the council. And then the landscaping standards would move into chapter 1710. We start with intent and then the scope of what this would do, specify maintenance, and then the general standards are really like the serious content, the substance of the change for the most part. That includes landscape material, irrigation criteria, water budgets, and then a lot of things within our landscape material and how to do that. And then there's a buffering and screening also moved over from 1709 into this section, and it defines a lot more about that. Followed by examples of different submittal requirements, who has to do which things, and the review procedures for those, enforcement. And there's some examples in the appendices of water budgets and how to do that sort of thing. Are there any questions before I move over? Or Corey, I know you're on the call. Is there anything you want to add before we move over to looking at the actual ordinance?
Thank you, Lexi. I don't have any comments at this time. I think you've expressed what a major overhaul this is to our landscaping code, and those previous provisions that were shown really identified what had ended up being a circular requirement system. So within our landscaping definitions and maintenance and review procedures, there wasn't ever, at least on a general basis, specific standards that were relating to content of the landscaping. Now, we did have another landscaping section for the supplementary regulations for developments over 30,000 square feet, which had a much more elaborate landscaping system. And when we have coordinated with our consultants, they identified that as a really well done, far more regulatory landscaping. So this is bringing our general code provisions into line with what that original context of that subsection was, but making it a little bit, bringing it a little bit more into an updated context. So I think so far, the framing for me was the biggest point, is to make sure that the mechanisms work. And that's something that I think when we get into submittal requirements and review procedures, a lot of the questions that we've had from our citizens is how is this going to relate to them? We spent quite a bit of time with the Planning Commission walking through that process, and I think that we can replicate some of that understanding here. But I think at this point, it would be great to, I think, turn it back over to you, Alexi, to move forward, and then to the council for any questions. But no, thank you.
Council have any questions at this point?
Okay. I'm going to switch over to the text of the ordinance, and we also did Victoria join? Not yet. Okay. I do think we should also thank a lot of people who have been working on this. And Victoria and Lindsay have all been our consultants throughout this process, and then a number of people in the planning office, some who are currently with us and some who have since left the city, have been involved in this since 2021 when it started. So this has been a group effort to try to pull this together. Okay. 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 My plan is not to spend a long time on the whereas statements unless people have specific questions about them, and to go into a couple of the important definitions and then just get to sort of our general standards and the main content quickly. But I'm happy to answer questions if people had stuff before then. In the definitions, we had a few new ones that seem particularly important to understanding the rest of this. Active recreation area is one of those. Because it is not included in this ordinance. This is one of the exemptions. Active recreation areas would include sports fields, play areas, parks, things like that. The way you would conserve water in a recreation area would be different than you would, let's say, in a front yard, because they're meant to be used by a lot of people. And so we felt like this is kind of something that should be addressed outside of these specific provisions. Going into the definition of landscaping, this one originally was some combination of a variety of things, and we included that here, but we go on to build on that so that you actually do have to have vegetation. Prior to this, you could have I don't know, a blade of grass is the example we've been using, and a yard of rocks, and that would count as a landscape. And although that may be water efficient, it's not necessarily good for some of the other purposes of a landscape. So we've tried to elaborate on what landscaping would be. Other important pieces of that would be the building footprint, driveway, non-irrigated portions of parking lots, hardscapes, things like that are not part of landscaping. And that portable furniture and plant containers are also not considered part of landscaping. This particularly came up in the discussion of whether or not a raised bed was landscaping. It would be, but let's say a potted plant on your porch is not landscaping. Personal agriculture cultivation. There it is. So just right here. Personal agriculture cultivation was one of the things that also I wanted to make a point. This is still allowed. This is part of our exempt section. It is still allowed for people to grow food outside of this. They don't necessarily have to pick a water-wise plant off of our list in this situation if they're growing it for food. And then I think this is the last one I wanted to check. Turf grass. We do limit cool season turf grass in here. We do also try to differentiate between cool season and warm season turf grasses, which would have, in general, they have differing water requirements. And when people talk about turf grass, they are usually talking about cool season turf grass like Kentucky bluegrass, which requires, in general, more water than warm season turf grasses. So we did separate these out in order to try to define better which things are limited within the landscape ordinance. Okay. All right, getting more into the changes that we made as we went through this. Everything in red is the previous ordinance, which we just included for reference. But since we've already talked about what used to exist, I'm not going to talk about it at this time unless there are specific questions. The first change is the section that would be in 1709, which would be the special water standards applying to residential dwelling units and lodging units. This is the only piece of the proposed changes that would apply to the interior of a structure. And it proposes that for new residential dwelling units and lodging units, rather than, let's say, existing, they would contain water sink labeled fixtures, including faucets, shower heads, toilets, urinals, etc. And that units would install also Energy Star qualified appliances where applicable. The rest of this refers to outside of a house or a landscape, not necessarily a house, a building. Our intent here was to enhance and preserve the quality and life and property values. This is coming pretty close to exactly out of what we had previously.
Alexi, I might jump in from one additional piece. There is the general plan provisions, which are important to framing how we're developing ordinance initiatives. So as we've reviewed those sections and tried to incorporate, a lot of that language was specifically profiled. So while we're on one hand been given the direction to specifically pursue water conservation elements, we do have additional elements, and that's why you're going to see this balancing effect of not purely just removing all living plant material, which would essentially eliminate water by necessity. We're also being directed to drive stability and balance of our community, which requires some plant material. So we're basically generating a balanced spectrum with a maximum and minimum to maintain within those requirements. So that's the only additional piece as far as intent. Wanted to plug that quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Corey. And we also have Victoria, our consultant, with us now too, if you have specific questions as we go along. Thank you for being here, Victoria. All right, moving on to the scope and applicability. I think some of the maybe most relevant pieces of this are down with the 2 household dwellings and multi-household dwellings would be affected by this, including 3 and 6 units. This would also include single home dwellings, permitted residential uses. And then this is the piece that we pulled over from the existing ordinance, that 70% of the area contained within the front and side yard adjacent to the street in a residential agricultural zone would be landscaped. And we say this because later in the discussion, we talk about areas that have required landscaping. So that would be your front yard and your like street adjacent side yard. Any landscaping, like as a general term, could be in your backyard as well, or on a side yard that's not adjacent to a street. Okay. Moving on to the reserved landscaping standards, one of the other things we wanted to point out was the more direct requirements of this section apply in addition to standards included in this chapter relating to water conservation methods. As Corey mentioned, there are other parts of our code that affect landscape. So it's trying to show where this would apply in relation to those. Okay. Going on to the landscaping maintenance, we still require it. It's very similar to what was existing. The main difference here is I think we took out the requirement that you water your landscape, although it still has to be clean, orderly, healthful, just to acknowledge that some landscapes maybe don't require regular watering. And then moving on to the general standards. Okay, so this is a section where we probably made a lot of the substantial changes. First, we are proposing that a minimum of 25% of the landscape area would have living plant material measured by the spread at maturity, and that tree canopies can be up to 15 of that 25%. The idea being that a tree is a very good contribution to a landscape, but it might not entirely help with erosion and soil loss and some other things. So there would be additional landscaping material included. Then there has been a discussion about trees in the right of way. In this case, the proposal is that we would have trees in the right of way every 40 linear feet. There have been discussions, and we would be interested in council feedback on whether this should not just apply to public right of way, but also to private streets. Beyond the initial requirement of just having it every 40 feet, we also have a few other sections in here that we have had discussion. So I want to point out in section 3, trees planted in park strips shall be as identified from the approved plant list. So we have come up with a plant list for people to select from. And in part 4 here, we have suggested that trees with low water requirements could be hand watered until maturity, but trees that were planted with higher water requirements would need to be irrigated. And so we don't end up planting trees that would die. There also are provisions within this for trees to be planted within the yard to count towards this. So a yard that has trees within 16 for an attached sidewalk or 12 feet of a sidewalk with a detached sidewalk, then existing trees could count towards the tree requirement. And in the case where it's not possible to plant trees for some reason, that there would be a chance to do a fee in lieu or to plant a tree somewhere else that would count towards it. Does the council have any feelings about this section or about whether this should also apply to private streets?
The only thing I would say about private streets is the streets in my neighborhood are private streets. And I'm not sure our houses are far enough apart to have a tree every 40 feet, especially a really big tree.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just something to think about, that maybe existing neighborhoods could be looked at on a case by case basis.
Okay. That some neighborhoods don't have room for that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that keeps doing that when I move it. I'll try not to move it again. I feel like I need a little more time to think about it, not being, a landscaper or landscape architect myself. but one of the things that occurs to me just about variation in our town is obviously we have some places where we have sidewalks, we have other places where we don't have sidewalks, and people have been told, at some point, these first so many feet may become a sidewalk. And so this is one of the things that occurs to me when I start thinking about that.
That's exactly what I was thinking of too, is like, as you look at
Yeah.
these neighborhoods where could potentially have sidewalks, even right now, it would mean ripping out a lot of trees, which I think is a huge barrier. Can you just tell me, like, what is a right-of-way tree? Is it-
Mhm. Yeah, let me see if I can get up to our definitions to,
I mean, I tried reading it, but like, where, like,
sure,
it's a
in
yard,
general, so this would be area that the city has dedicated or we have the right of way to. In general, this would end up being along on the side of the street. And the purpose of it is to mitigate urban heat island effect.
Like a park strip.
what's
tree,
that?
Like a park strip tree.
Okay, okay.
That primarily that's what we're talking about.
Right. And that's what, the only thing I was thinking, like, kind of what I was saying is like, if people are putting them in their yards, that there is this, they're not putting them where a potential sidewalk could be, that there's a setback
Mhm.
for future sidewalks.
Okay. Thank you.
I might have a comment for you as I think through this longer, but yes, just off the cuff, I'm not
Sure.
sure. I'm not sure.
Sure, yeah, and we did try, there is a section in here that I skipped over because a lot of it is more like engineering standards, but we did also try to prevent the trees from being planted too close to public infrastructure, too close to stop signs or intersections where people can't see, things like that.
When I was reading through that, I just wanted to make sure, did you feel like the way that was written, it was consistent with the way the Cane Creek changes are conceptualized? That was the only question I had when I read that part. I was like,
I can verify, we
Okay.
did run it by engineering and ask if these were appropriate, and we felt that they were, but we can verify that they're consistent.
yeah.
For
Well,
something like in the public
Yeah.
right of way, there's probably more space than not, right? But I think the private street standards might be difficult or case by case.
yeah, I just
Cane Creek's
thought,
so wide.
yeah, there was some room for interpretation. So I thought my interpretation might be that it doesn't get in the way of traffic, but someone else might, I don't know, the way they visualize things working might be different. But that was kind of one side question I had for you guys was, is the idea that the layperson is supposed to interpret everything in this ordinance, or that they'll be able to come to the city for some help? Because honestly, parts of it I can understand, and other parts, I mean, if I was held to the letter of the law to get it all right, I would struggle because,
Mhm.
some of the acronyms, I don't know, some of the, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, Corey, did you want to add anything to that?
Where private streets came into play with this is originally this was a comment actually made by the engineering department, which happened to align with a lot of our public comment to reduce heat island. We often in the engineering realm, when it comes to developments, have challenges on where we're placing landscaping because they're obviously wanting to protect the infrastructure. But coming from engineering, this is actually a sympathetic approach that they found within the way we were generating those standards, that we've crossed a spectrum of essentially the initial development standard. And if those standards can't be met, there's an alternative, and then an alternative to that, and even a third. So we have these contingency plans throughout possible developments of the right-of-way trees in order to promote a more complete street system within the general development code rather than city-initiated development of those complete streets. Now, with private streets, the reason we've kind of set that aside is that typically and historically, major developments have been proposed as a major subdivision. And I think this council will recognize it's been a while since we've seen a major subdivision actually come through. What we're seeing now are townhome divisions or condominium divisions, which essentially maintains a large area of land with many private ownership homes, but developed on a single private parcel. So our right-of-way standards don't infiltrate into those. What we would be getting more often than not, this is the trend of development, is large, what seem like subdivisions, but are private developments. So where this standard would come into play is where we have those larger private developments, those what are private streets would be treated similar to how we're developing the right-of-way system. So that's the consideration there is if we had very few and far between private large-scale developments, it may not be worth time. And like Tanya brought up, particular PUDs, they operate under a totally different parameter set. So what we'd be talking about is kind of your by right townhome developments, condominium developments versus a PUD pad or MPD. So for consideration purposes, that's the plug we had. We're not sure how many more we're going to get. So that's where we kind of left it out as an opportunity for council to weigh those. That's my only contribution, I think, on those private street trees. But I think the way the questions that are being developed are the right questions. I think we have a lot of answers baked in, but for certainly some of those, we can come back to you with the full answers.
Ronnie, I want to make sure your question was like fully answered. When you were asking about a layperson understanding, did you mean the entire, like the landscaping requirements? Were you talking about the street specifically? Like,
I'm just thinking the code and the ordinance.
Yeah.
I mean, because
Mhm.
I think when we're looking at this being new development, right? So if someone is building a new duplex, they're going to have to hire either they have specialty in doing the entire project, or they're going to hire an architect, an engineer, and electrician, a whole team of experts. And it might have to be that there is some sort of landscaping expertise as well on that team. Or we have plenty of people who are owner builders who are sophisticated enough to figure out how to build their home by themselves. I think an ordinance, a landscaping ordinance, is not more difficult to parse through than building code or fire code,
And in addition to that, I think those are good points. When we get to the submittal requirements, we also did try to make lower level plans easier to submit on, giving people kind of a prescriptive option with a worksheet, and then a more complicated option that would be like a water budget, which would give people more flexibility. But if someone was feeling overwhelmed, they could go prescriptive. And then as the plans become higher level, then the requirements would get into some of those irrigation standards and things that feel complicated. But in general, if someone was submitting at a higher level, they would also have a landscape architect to do that. And we will also, we can talk about it too when we get to that section, because feedback is welcome. Going through the next general standard, artificial plants, we excluded artificial plants from the required landscape area, the front yard, site adjacent. However, there's no particular, there's nothing in here about putting artificial plants elsewhere, for example, in a backyard or on your porch or something like that. Based on Planning Commission feedback, we also have an approved plant list, which it is possible to add plants to. So 90% of forbs, shrubs, and trees would need to be off the approved plant list, and 100% of ground covers and ornamental grasses, with the idea that if somebody had prized rose bushes that weren't on the list, then it would be possible to keep some of the things in your yard that are important to you. It would also be possible, depending on what the thing is, to add it to the list. And we are allowing people to choose whether they want to measure by quantity or spread based on, let's say, maybe a tree that's not on the list that has a large spread. You might want to do it by quantity, or maybe several smaller plants, in which case you might want to do it, by spread, and then by tree, you'd want to do it by number. We excluded spring bulbs because they generally do not require additional irrigation. And then anything in the section cannot be on the noxious weed list for the Grant County.
Lexi, can I just ask a real quick question? Like, somebody might be wondering in the audience, just, where our list came from or how it was generated. So
The approved plant list came from working with our consultants, and then also looking at some lists that came off of Grand County. Victoria, would you also like to talk about some of the lists that you consulted?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me here tonight. We're happy to share the approved plant list, which is also seen in the appendix, but we actually pulled from an existing list from a local nursery in the city of Moab, and as well as some other reputable sources from USU Extension, Grand County, and others across the state that have climate appropriate plants for Moab.
okay, thanks. Yeah, just probably some that helps people know the method to our madness. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And again, we did add into the appendix a process if somebody had a plant that wasn't on the list that they felt should be in order to be able to add things. Cool season turf limits. Cool season turf limit is proposed not to be more than 10% of the total landscaped area or 200 square feet, whichever is greater. This would be within the prescriptive option. As we get to the submittal requirements for people who are doing a water budget on a level, general plan would have some more flexibility with that if they chose to do a water budget as opposed to a prescriptive option. One of the things that is required if we want this ordinance to qualify for the turf buyback program is the park strips and other landscaped areas that are less than 8 feet do not include cool season turf grass. And the purpose of that is that they are very difficult to water efficiently. Mulch, in this case, the suggestion is in order to maintain water in the soil and also to reduce invasive weeds that would take roots, the suggestion is to have 2 to 3 inches. There are a couple exceptions to this. One is for native plants, which mulch might be detrimental to the propagation of those, or people who are trying to promote habitat for pollinators, in which case some of the landscape could be left in a more accessible condition. We had a few different discussions about water features. The recommendation is to allow water features that also have recirculating water, that have wind shut off in order not to have the water blowing out of, let's say, a fountain, to have covers to reduce evaporation and to use recycled water where available. If a person were doing a water budget calculation, this could be included and it would be very similar to a high water hydrozone. The next section is hydrozoning, which is basically planting plants with similar water needs together. If people were in a general plan, we don't actually require an irrigation system, but it does allow people to water the landscape more efficiently, putting lots of water where it's needed and not a lot of water with plants that don't need it, or things that are not irrigated don't have to receive water at all. So it's just a grouping of plants. And then for areas that do have irrigation systems, they can set it up in such a way to give the appropriate amount of water to different types of plants. So we're going into the irrigation system criteria. This is outside of the landscape materials section. Were there any other questions about landscape materials? Okay. For the irrigation system, this section applies to landscaped areas that have to have permanent irrigation. That is not all areas, but if they do, they would come into compliance with this. It would ask for water sense appropriate fixtures and that things are metered, so it's possible to know how much water they're using. I'm just going to kind of jump to different places that are particularly relevant and answer questions if you have them. The system should be designed to prevent runoff and overspray, again, to prevent water waste, that it would have appropriate spacing, to have distribution uniformity, again, to water efficiently, reduce water waste. Overhead irrigation would not be permitted within 24 inches of a non-pervious surface. Again, to prevent overspray, to be able to water more efficiently. And where feasible, trees should be placed on separate valves, especially in a case where somebody might cut back water use. The trees are important long-term and we wouldn't want to kill them if the grass is going dormant. So where possible, to have the option to water trees and reduce water to other areas that would just be going dormant. And then you'll see the section where we were talking a little bit about the state guidelines on this, reducing small spaces with irrigation, to not do that in order to be able to water efficiently. Okay, that is a run through on irrigation. Are there questions on that?
Yeah. Just one really quick question, only because I've heard the phrase, but I realize I don't really know what it is. What's a smart controller? Maybe I know what it is and I call it something else.
Smart controller in general would be adaptive. There are different kinds, and I might turn it over to Victoria to talk more about it. They can be adaptive to soil moisture, weather, And Victoria, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, that's pretty much it, Alexi. But yeah, essentially they're controllers that are usually equipped with Wi-Fi or Bluetooth that can connect into current weather conditions or be tapped into your soil moisture. So they're only watering when, for example, it's really hot and it needs it, or they're shutting off when they're detecting rainfall or soil moisture. So yeah, they're a really useful type of controller that folks can use these days to water when the plants actually need it.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions on irrigation before we go to the water budget?
I was just gonna ask, I'm kind of reading.
Mhm.
What number is it? 17.10.
Okay.
C, like, when, maybe you can kind of explain this to me. When does these kick in? Like if someone's, redoing their house or something,
Mhm.
and stuff, and like, what's the threshold for like, okay, you've done this, this, and this, now you have to do a landscape plan. And does that landscape plan then go, okay, you've done this and this and this, now you have to put in SmartWise appliances in the house.
Yeah, so the indoor changes are only for new construction.
Okay.
So nothing you did outdoors would kick you into having to change your
Even a
indoor.
remodel.
Yeah, the way we have it set up is that the WaterSense and Energy Star would apply to new construction.
Okay.
Now outdoors, we created, let me switch what I'm sharing.
I'm wondering, well, if we're already there, I was wondering if we want to work our way through the list, because I think, Jason, we're definitely, I think getting there, that's one of the bigger blocks. But this, I think, could take up a lot of time, and I know we've only got about 15 minutes left. Lexi,
Okay,
whatever
I'll
you'd like
switch.
to do, Jason, of course, at your direction, whatever you'd like to do.
Okay. Okay, the water budget, the way it's set up is that there would be a maximum applied water budget of 15 gallons per season per square foot, or 24 inches per season. So people would put together a budget with the plants that they have and the total square feet that they have. And Corey, do we want to go into the slides?
Yeah, I think we could
Okay.
maybe breeze beyond screening buffering, that can be set aside, but I think this does transition nicely into Jason's comment if we get down into what would be submittal criteria and then basically our levels, how these general standards correspond to what that means for people remodeling, what that means for new construction, and the different levels of construction that we have.
Okay. I'm going to go briefly into the slides to demonstrate sort of what it would do for somebody. So a water budget, you'd have your total lot size and your house size, which is not part of your landscape, and your paved areas, which are also not part of your landscape. And then you'd have your total landscaped area. This is not required for everybody. At a low level, you would have the option to just meet some of the standards and you don't have to do a water budget. This is just an option. And I'm showing it to try to show what people could do with this if they decided they wanted to pursue it. And then what you would do is you decide what you're planting where, and whether those are low, medium, high water use, or if you have a pool or cool season turf grass. And then from there, you can make a calculation of if you're using, for example, overhead irrigation or drip, which would change the efficiency, and develop a water budget. There is a worksheet and also a spreadsheet that you can use to develop something like this. And this particular landscape involves medium water in the front, low water around the sides, and then this yard would have 300 feet of turf grass in the back, and they could have a pool, and they would come in at 14 gallons per square feet per season. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
It's
Yeah.
sharing the wrong screen. Okay, there we go. Sorry.
It's so pretty.
All right, so they have a medium water, thank you. And then in the front, low water in the back, and then you could have cool season turf grass and a pool. And use calculations. In this case, we're using overhead irrigation. However, if you switch to drip, it would change the efficiency and therefore conserve water. So this landscape would come out at 14 gallons per square feet per season, which is less than 15. This would be an acceptable landscape. If this person organized this with overhead drip irrigation, it would be 11 gallons per square foot per season. So this is just an example of what you could hypothetically do if you wanted to have a water budget. Now, if you did a prescriptive route, we have a limit on, you would either be 10%, so 385 square feet would be your max turf grass. But if you wanted to have more turf grass, it would be possible to do a water budget and adjust the rest of your landscape accordingly. Okay.
Alexi, is there a formula for people or somewhere they can go to see if they're meeting that 14 gallon per square foot criteria with what they've currently got, or?
We have developed a couple calculators and we could post those so people could go in and kind of guess where they would land with it. We have one that's currently in development for people who are estimating based off of the specific plants they put in. And we have one for more advanced people who might have like landscape architecture background, and that one's already complete. So we could have that available for people to play around with and see where their landscape would be.
Okay.
Okay. The next section is screening and buffering. Corey, do you want to take that on, or would you like me to go through?
I think in light of Jason's comment, if the council would like, maybe we come back to this element.
Okay.
It's pretty standalone. What we're basically doing is moving away from what were variable standards into a very fixed and regular standard. That's to basically sum that up. What that does do is articulate a lot of these elements. So a lot of these are new, very clear-cut matrix elements. We'll leave it at that for now, unless anyone wants to bring that up
And then
before
cut to
we
the middle,
move on.
And then we'll cut to the submittal requirements.
Wherever you'd like to. I apologize
Okay.
for messing with the flow. I think
No,
I think move, like you said, off of water budget kind of into how these coordinate is a natural transition, but wherever you'd like to go next.
all right, that makes sense. One other thing to mention about the water budget is that you can increase your water budget by having special features, which would include ecological restoration projects, bioretention areas, non-irrigated pervious areas that will let water infiltrate into the soil, gray water use, native plants, some stormwater conveyance like vegetated swales or surface water irrigation would all be ways that you could add up to 2 gallons per square foot to your water budget. Okay, and then we'll go to submittal requirements for our last 12 minutes. Okay, the submittal requirements is going to get at Jason's questions of who has to do what and when. We have a list of our general standards here, and then the irrigation system criteria, water budget, and all of the plant materials at the top. For lower level planning, like a building permit, for example, everyone has to do 1 through 3. They have to have 25% of the landscape be living. Artificial plants are not in the required landscape area, and the plants should be off the plant list. After that, for example, building permit level, it would be 4 through 7. So cool season turf, mulch, reducing evaporation on water features and grouping plants. Or you could go directly to the water budget for number 9 and have a little more flexibility, but it also requires a little bit more work with a calculator. For a level 1 landscaping plan, which would be something a little more advanced, a bigger project, we have 1 through 3, which is required for everybody, and then not the cool season turf limit because they would be required to have a water budget. So it would be 5 through 9. And then for level 2, so the highest level of planning on here, it would be everything. So that would be the most restrictive. I'm going to go back to the slides. Okay. What this would mean for a lot of people about when they would want to come into compliance is if the city passed the ordinance, but the property had not changed, then it would not need to come to compliance at that time. Adding 100 square foot, for example, of a vegetable garden, it's a vegetable garden, so it's exempt, but also it's not big enough of a change. This would come in at 51% of change, or we also have a square foot requirement. So it's not big enough. Remodeling a bathroom, plumbing, electrical upgrades, anything like that. We don't include landscaping with interior remodels. Adding a porch is not considered a modification to the structure at this time. I think there's litigation pending on that. At this time, it means you would not have to come into compliance. If you added a carport and got a building permit, at that time you would need to, because you'd modified a structure. Or if you changed 51% of your landscape, even if it were turf to gravel, then you would need to bring the entire landscape into compliance. So 2,000 square feet or 50% would be the cutoff for bringing the whole landscape into compliance. Are there any questions or discussion on those requirements?
No, thank you.
Okay.
As Alexi's transitioning back here, really quick, what I might plug as far as this framework is that we've maintained the levels of construction that exist within the code. And what we've done is broken out where these general standards will apply to our existing development reviews. So when we have building permits, that general standards, typically those are either owner builders, remodels, or small scale residential construction. Level ones, that's when we're often getting into our commercial or larger residential, either redevelopments or new developments. And then level twos are large scale, typically commercial, in seldom cases, large residential construction as well, talking about larger scale apartments. And having the level of intensity of review correspond with those as practically as what seemed to be feasible, and also what is bringing the city in general as a whole towards more compliance. Because I think what we do have to recognize is we can't identify commercial developments alone. Typically commercial developments, especially given their levels of construction, aren't developing large areas of landscaping, especially within general commercial. Now, if we're talking overnight accommodation development, which we have reduced development standards in right now because of that limitation of the ordinance, they're developing in a zero-scape spectrum most of the time anyway. So where we're actually needing to see a lot of our improvement is in our residential zones, specifically within our low density residential zone. So while we do want to balance not putting so much of a burden on what we might call our local community, that's also where we need to see a lot of compliance or the improvements in our conservation efforts. So we especially with the feedback from the community, that's where we've tried to balance those out. But hopefully that framework makes sense for the moment. Sorry, Lexi, thanks for letting me jump in there.
No, thank you. I think so. At the review procedures, I think we have maintained the legal non-conforming status. What we just covered, about 2,000 square feet or 50%, is what would generally send somebody into complying for the entire landscape as recommended. And then exemptions would include active recreation areas, cemeteries, local, state, federal historical sites, plant collections that are specifically to display plants that are open to the public, restoration areas, interior remodels, and replacement or repair of like an existing irrigation system or something like that. Just fixing what you already have would not necessarily pull you into complying with it at that time. Other things to note: personal agriculture cultivations not included, or limited production of food, fowl, or approved agricultural uses. We did have a special addition here recently for geohazard zones with erosive soils, to take it out of the minimum percentage of plant material in order to not require people to water soil that could potentially erode and undermine their house. There is a map that our engineering department has that would include who might fall into one of these areas. If somebody had a specific situation where is not outlined here, but it's something we haven't even thought of yet. There is an exception procedure that somebody could go through in order to try to get an exception to some of the requirements. And I think that's probably the end of the most substantial changes to this. Corey, would you like to add anything, or Victoria?
That was perfect. Thank you.
Okay, we did skip over screening and buffering as a section, which is a much smaller section. And we could do that at a future workshop. Are there any questions, or Victoria, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I think that was a comprehensive overview. Thanks, Alexi. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you.
Given the 4 minutes we have left, I had a question about next steps, and I was going to make a request. Just reading through it at a bunch of random questions. I don't know if anybody else would have them or not, but so I was wondering, as follow-up to this, can we get a Google Doc version from you and Corey where we can just put those questions, and maybe it
Yes.
helps other people if some of us have the same questions. Yeah, some of them are smaller, some of them are probably bigger. And then, yeah, I guess my question was, what is the next step? Another workshop, or I don't know.
You guys.
Do you guys feel like another workshop is needed or would be helpful?
I'd like
Shorter one
to
or-
cover screening and buffering, and maybe it helps for us to know, just like you asked us that question about standards on whatever residential or private streets. It would help to kind of know what some of the questions are that maybe in advance of a meeting that you guys have so a little time to think through them. Yeah, all that stuff would help me. And then if I have a little time to put questions on a Google sheet, having some of those answers might save a little time in the workshop.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, would it be helpful if regarding private streets, we had like a staff recommendation after we
I think
investigated it a little more?
It's always helpful because especially if we aren't experts in it, maybe to have some of the pros and cons, or just to understand the scope. Yeah.
I think ultimately it comes down to what engineering is thinking is feasible for some of those private streets. And they might have to think through some scenarios about it.
Okay, we will come back to workshop screening and buffering. We will provide a Google Doc to you to ask further questions, which we can also answer in the next workshop, and do a little more research on private streets. Does that cover your concerns at this time?
You guys okay with that? Okay. Alrighty. Thank you, Alexi. Thank
Yeah,
you,
thank you.
Corey. Thank you, Victoria.
Thank you.
That was very informative.
Great, thank you.
Alrighty. If nobody has anything else, we will move on to our public comment period. And you may notice that's just a different title for that part of the agenda. The mayor thought it was prudent to change that to public comment rather than citizens to be heard, because you don't have to be a citizen of the city of Moab to comment. So do we have any public comments tonight? Charlotte, go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Charlotte Mates. I've been a citizen of Moab City for 23 plus years this time, and 4 years in the 50s. And I'm happy to be here tonight to thank the city of Moab and all of the people who put so much tremendous work into bringing our Moab area transit into existence. I think it deserves to be recognized and applauded after years of no public shuttle or transportation. There's so many people that are so grateful to have that and be able to use it who do not have transportation. And I'm here tonight because I think that I've visited a couple of times with Richard, who is the coordinator and grant writer for the transit system, and he is taking on as the person who is coordinating all of that for all of the grants that have been written, and it comes from the federal government, from UDOT, from the county, from the city, and the grants are the things that have come together to make this a possibility. We have it for 5 years. And if we use it, the chances of us renewing it are greater. So I'm encouraging every person to use it, to find out what it's about. I went one day and rode the fixed route. And just as an observation, there are bus stops and signs all on the 17 fixed route stops. There, however, are no benches or no shelters. Years ago, probably 5 or 6 years ago, there was a meeting with the Parks Department and it came up, why are there not shuttles into Arches? The man who had just been assigned the transportation there said there are no shuttles into Arches because until we have shelters, because of our extreme weather conditions, we will never be able to bring shuttles in. People cannot take, as any of you would know, you can't go in the heat of today and sit and wait for a shuttle without having some type of shelter. Same thing in the winter time. Okay, so tonight I want to plant a seed. The seed that I want to plant has to do with bus stops and that have no benches or no shelters. And I brought, thank you, sir, appreciate it. I brought a poster today that, I don't know if you can see it this way or this way. And this is talking about purple benches that Audrey Graham initiated a program a few years back. She had to drop that program because her time was limited for working on housing and daycare. At the time she was doing it, she had read something with the, from, I believe it was Santa Fe, New Mexico. She'd either seen it or read it, that there was a program for purple benches. To make it viable, she needed to have 20 purple benches in Moab. She only got 12. And then, of course, she decided to drop the program because it wasn't being used. I believe that right now, I would like to challenge all of the businesses who have a shuttle stop in front of them to try to get the people in construction to help us build purple benches with shelters with the approval of the city council and the government people. I believe the government has done their part and it's time for the citizens to do theirs. Step up, volunteer, and get the benches and shelters built. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Charlotte. Okay, is there anybody else that wants to make a public comment? Okay, we will move right on to our department head update. I'll let Carly take that one.
Sure. Hey, everybody. I want to take the opportunity during the department head update is to introduce our new community development director, Michael Black. Michael, do you want to come up to the front and introduce yourself? He started last Monday on July 17th and it's been getting oriented. There's quite a bit for him to catch up on.
Yeah.
So I'll take it away, Michael.
Okay, I'm Michael Black. I'm happy to be here. I've been here about a week and a half now and it's hot. I am originally from Utah. I've got 20 years of experience in planning and local government work. About 8 of those are in Utah and another 12 are in Oregon. And I just moved here from Oregon, Southern Oregon, which is a little bit different than the Willamette Valley. So it's a little bit warm up there, but not as warm as this. And I'm happy to be here, happy to learn the ropes. Like I said, I've been here about a week now and everyone's been super kind. It's been a great opportunity to be able to come here and work with such great people. And I truly appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. And I do need to mention, I'm sure that you know this, I'm the mayor pro tem. I am not the mayor. Our mayor is indisposed tonight. So that's what mayor pro tems do.
Well,
But welcome.
thank
So we're
you.
glad that you're here.
Thank you very much.
So he'll probably be reaching out to each of you to meet individually to understand your priorities. Cool.
Carly, would it, and Mayor Pro Tem, would it be okay to just take a second for people who, may not have been paying attention to the fact that we have a new community development director position, just to explain in a nutshell what Michael will be doing?
Sure,
I
Michael
think
will,
it's a really big nutshell.
it's a really big, it's a huge department. Yeah, Michael will be overseeing, I believe, 4 departments when it comes down to it: engineering, planning, sustainability, and communications. So these are 4 departments that work very closely already, and just will provide a more cohesive direction for that working group. He'll also be implementing some of the big components of our larger initiatives, such as like the community visioning process, a lot of housing development and policy, and working to just bridge a gap between City Hall and our residents. So this is a position that has existed in the past, being recreated, and maybe it looks different, but one that has been absent for a little while, and I think it's time to bring it back. We're really glad he's here.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here as well. I'm glad to get started on all those things that Carly just mentioned. So
Good.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, is that it? Yep. Oh, we're doing good. Okay, we will move on to the consent agenda. There are 3 items on our consent agenda this evening. 5.1 is the ratification of City of Moab comments to UDOT's long-range transportation plan, the approval of the minutes, June 27th, and approval of the bills against the City of Moab in the amount of $1,531,784.98. Do I have a motion, or do you want to pull any of those things out of the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, motion by Jason. Do I have a second?
A second.
Second by Luke. All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes 4-0. Okay, we have 2 presentations tonight from Mike Kennerly with the Solid Waste Special Service District. Come on up. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome to like scoot up a chair if you want, Jessica. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm just pulling up the Zoom link so I can get in. That's what I'm doing. Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now.
I took that one.
Oh, nice. Smart.
These are a lot more comfortable.
I know this part of the reason why I took it too. All right.
Righty. Once again, my name is Mike Kennerly, Executive Director, Canyonland Solid Waste Authority. Been here almost 6 months now. This is Jessica Thacker, our Program Manager. I hope I pronounced that right. And she is my communications guru. So she's running the slideshow. This is just a brief background. I would think most of you are aware of it to a degree of what we do. We started out as the landfills, basically, Moab landfill and Klondike. But in May of 2021, we acquired the transfer station as well as the hauling company, Monument Waste. We run both landfills, the CRC, as well as all curbside, trash, and recycling services. We currently have, well, as of tomorrow, it'll be 40 employees, a fleet of 20 vehicles, and 10 pieces of heavy equipment. We service the whole county as well as parts of San Juan County as well. Excuse me.
So sorry, the notes
Okay.
didn't show up.
Briefly, I won't go into great detail unless you have questions, which we'll be able to cover later, but Moab landfill, the one, once graded the second most beautiful landfill in America, is right here in Moab, and it is a class 5B, which means basically it's I'm sorry, 4B. I'm still learning the codes, though it's right there if I would have just read it correctly. Basically, Moab is a C&D landfill, construction and demolition. Basically, we accept just about any inert material that is not considered, I think the term is putrescible. That type of material, the municipal solid waste, the MSW, does all go out to Klondike. We do have a green waste reclamation program where we can reclaim the green waste as well as all wood waste. And we produce what we call an unscreened mulch. It's a fairly good material. We sell it out really well. So it's a great material, and we're able to divert that from the landfill. This just gives you a breakdown in our cubic yards at Moab for the last since 2020. You can see some spikes here or there, but overall it's pretty level. We did have a bit of a growth spurt there in 2021, but overall it's pretty level. I can't emphasize enough, it's cubic yards. We do not have scales at the Moab landfill, something I wish we desperately did have.
And also just a note for 2023, that is only for January through June volumes. So it's not going to match up with your 2020, 2021 and 2022 volumes. So just kind of keep that in mind for all of our graphs moving forward. That is only half year values.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Mhm.
Once again, you can see the total volume by year as opposed to broken out. And once again, 2023 is just through the end of June, actually, I believe. I don't believe we have July's completed in there. Of course not. Simple slide.
And y'all are free to ask any questions as we present these slides.
Can I ask a quick question? I know like from years ago, I think when we tore down one of the old schools, right? Like that can create just a massive, peak in one of these graphs because all of a sudden, the C&D landfill is, taking all pretty much the whole school.
Yeah.
So I didn't know, aside from, big demolitions like that, what, if anything, should we be aware of that might cause a big, either a big peak or maybe a big dip? I don't know. Is there anything that stands out? Yeah.
So I know for sure the middle school demolition
Yeah.
caused I've been calling them spike events.
Yeah.
So you have the clean fill spike, and then you also have the construction and demolition debris spike. You'll have a couple of other spike events, so to speak, where you have these large scale construction projects, kind of like, and this will be more reflected in Klondike, the Hoodoo additions. The casitas that they're putting in the back, you've got Lions back. So basically any sort of like large scale developments will contribute to these spike factors. Or if you have a special cleanup like, what was it? Cinema Court and
Okay.
Pat Creek, those will also factor in. So basically any sort of like special events.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Fire cleanup. Okay, thanks.
I think to keep in mind, yes, that was definitely a spike with the school. We just simply don't see that volume that quickly for very much. Moab has a limited economies of scale as far as landfills and recycling. You won't see huge changes in volume. It's just not going to happen. We don't have the industry here at this point. Not necessarily a bad thing, just a fact. And that does play into long-term, any type of volume-based business, landfills and recycling, the more volume, the better economy of scale. So we're kind of, I don't want to say behind the eight ball, but it does make it very much different especially for a major expansion of the landfill. You've got to be able to justify the expansion, quite frankly, the expense that goes into it. But I veered on you there. I just wanted to throw that out at you. Moab has approximately 10 to 15 years left. That can change if we did see a huge subdivision go in, a major reconstruction, remodeling of the downtown or something along those lines. When I got here 6 months ago, the fear was that it was less than 5. But Chris was able to do an amazing job in the last couple of years to help create space and compact it better. So we've actually extended that life a little bit. Klondike, as I mentioned earlier, municipal solid waste, your everyday residential and commercial trash. We also take the biosolids from the city, a limited amount of waste grease. Some construction and demo does come out there. We're trying to divert as much concrete as we can to use as roads. At this point, we're simply storing it because we don't have the means to transport it at this point. Some special waste, non-friable asbestos, mainly, which comes out of smolder buildings. Other than that, not a whole lot of out of the ordinary debris. It is on 80 acres, 40 acres of it is permitted, and approximately 60 years left in that first section. The breakdown by year, volume for Klondike. This is by category. The blue is obviously the municipal solid waste. As you can see, not major drastic changes, a little bit of a spike, but I wouldn't even call it a spike, just a larger year. And we're very close to last year's totals so far this year.
And just to put the municipal solid waste numbers into perspective, back in March, myself and Chris Scoville went to the Recycling Coalition of Utah Spring Conference. And at the same time, we toured the Washington County landfill that is in St. George. And the volumes that we do in a year, if I remember correctly, is what they do in 2 weeks. So just to kind of put that into perspective, the amount of waste that we make is 2 weeks for Washington County and is literally 24 hours in Las Vegas. Just to kind of put the numbers into perspective of how much we generate versus other tourist destinations.
Total volume by year, as you can see for this year in the yellow, we're not that far ahead or below of average, so to speak. Our recycling operations. We do manage 2 streams, 2 variations of recycling. The CRC, which is a source separated volunteer drop-off location. We also have the single stream curbside collection program. 2 very different ways of doing the same thing. We do want to point out that not only do we do materials like at the curb, but we also accept universal and electronic waste, as well as the used oil, of course. Something we want to publicize is we have added the number 5 plastics to the CRC. That is something we have been able to take at the curb for a while. It is a plastic that has developed a firm market. I would have not said that 10 years ago. I wouldn't have said it 5 years ago, but in the last 3 to 5, it has become a stable market that I don't see going anywhere. That is your cottage tubs, your yogurt containers, that type of thing.
And we've noticed just in the past, I want to say week to week and a half, by the addition of this number 5 plastics bin, we've increased the diversion rate from our number 2s and our number 1 plastic bins at the CRC, because a lot of folks were not sure
what to do with these relatively unknown plastics that were outside the realm of the number ones and the number twos. And we do periodic checks in these bags, and people have been doing a really good job of putting only number fives in there. And it's reduced the amount of times that we've had to go through the number twos and the number ones and pick out plastics that do not belong in there.
It really has helped the whole process. 1 second. That is our brand new 11 cubic yard truck that we just put into service last week. We have been able to purchase 2 new trucks, which were desperately overdue. And you'll note the new logo that we're putting on the trucks. Hopefully some people have noticed it around town. We'll slowly but surely put it on all of our vehicles. Volume breakdown by year for the recycling, basically. Once again, like the cardboard by far is the largest volume that we do at the CRC, and that comes from the commercial collection businesses mostly. Well, obviously commercial collection. But that is by far our largest material in tonnage that we were able to move. And that only really makes sense when you stop and think about it. Everything comes in a box, plain and simple. You can take a look at this, and if you have any questions, let me know. But glass obviously takes up quite a bit, but that's just because of the weight. It is a material that's being used less and less. You can go to your grocery store and see that. I miss my Miracle Whip bottle or jar. Everything's going to plastics.
And just a couple notes on the CRC commodity volumes. You'll notice that books are drastically lower than previous years. That is because we are now moving that into the mixed paper category. And I'm also quite pleased to see that electronic waste continues to grow each year. So that's a lot of rare earth metals and a lot of plastics that are actually not going into the landfill. And we are using the state contracted vendor who has gone through a rigorous set of testing and certification through the state of Utah to maintain that any electronic waste, especially ones that come with storage capacity on them, are being thoroughly wiped and clean, and they are actually reselling items that have the potential to resell, and then they are also recycling the metals that are in those. So there's that. And also on the single stream recycling, you'll notice that is only March through June of 2023. Those are the only volumes that I was able to verify the data on. I do not have any data from 2022, but just recall we had that acquisition and it was a bit of a transition between giving those numbers. So just to give you an idea of what the CRC is bringing in tonnage and what the single stream is bringing in tonnage.
Something we definitely want to promote and publicize is we have expanded the HHW collection. In the past, it was a special once or twice a year of event. And no matter how much those events get publicized, there's always somebody that seems to forget or didn't hear about it. Excuse me. So that is available every day we're open, correct?
Yep, that's correct. Including
Saturdays for drop off.
I was just thinking we could mention, in case somebody doesn't know what HHW is, a household hazardous waste, right?
Household
No, it's
hazardous
okay.
waste.
Yeah.
Your chemicals, your cleaners, that type of thing. It's safe and it's more convenient. And total volume of recycling that has come through the district. As you can see, we're on a good pace this year. And this is combining everything from CRC and single stream.
So I like the fact that if you look at our 2020 volumes and then you look at our 2023, just a half year is almost matching up to an entire year's worth of recycling efforts.
Excuse me. And of course, the transfer station. I think this is one of the most widely used. I'm very surprised how many people come through the gate every day. But it is a transfer station. Everything that comes through here gets transferred to Klondike. Oh, what did I say wrong? Well, I take that back.
Yeah, you finished enough.
You're mentioning the tires and whatnot that
Mhm.
do go to Moab to be stored. The scrap metal, we hopefully will be, if you've seen that pile, hopefully that'll be coming down here in the next couple of weeks. That is something that we collect, and then to make it worthwhile, we have to store it up for a vendor to come in. Fortunately, everyone's used to seeing it, and it's not considered an eyesore. It's just something that we do. But the single stream comes to the transfer station. It is all stored in the left when you're facing bay, and we try to take it to one of the materials processing centers every couple of weeks. That is continually turning closer and closer to a week, which is a good thing. But that's where our administrative offices are. And that's where you can find us most days. The diversion rates. A lot of people will refer to this as the recycling rate. Diversion is the correct terminology because it goes beyond recycling, such as the concrete we're trying to divert from the landfill and reuse as road base. That's a diversion. You can see the rates and where we're at. Excuse me. Not where I think any of us would like to be, but we've got a good program, and we can definitely turn up the volume.
So a note on the diversion, these are approximate numbers because every single one of our facilities operates in a different quantity of measurement. So MLF or Moab landfill operates in a cubic yard standard. A cubic yard of yard waste is not equal to the same amount of weight when it comes to a cubic yard of C&D. So again, these numbers need to be taken with a grain of salt. I did work the best I could with the conversion rate that is available. So the landfill numbers come from MLF and KLF items that we know for sure are buried, and the reclamation numbers come from items, or reclamation is a diversion. So you've got your electronic waste, your antifreeze, your used oil collection, anything that has either a recycled rate or a reclamation rate or a reuse rate. This also includes our tires that are tires and used oil are recycled through UDEQ state programs. Excuse me, you have your single stream, which goes to material recovery facilities. Goodness, I'm used to just saying MRF in Salt Lake and Denver. And then you've got items in which we reclaim ourselves. So you have your unscreened mulch program, your clean fill that we use as daily cover at both locations, or more specifically at MLF, and then asphalt, concrete that are used as road bases, just to kind of give you an idea. I have a little bit of a theory as to why 2021 is so low, and I believe that might have been in part to the COVID-19 pandemic when everybody switched over to single-use items to avoid the spread. So that's kind of why the numbers are looking a little crazy. And again, 2023 is only a 6-month period. So if you come back with a more defined conversion rate and you look a little bit deeper into your weight conversions, that number could definitely change.
The 2021, I can also, she's absolutely right. The single use skyrocketed, obviously, but also production almost came to a standstill. So things like boxes in the commercial, which produces so much more than residential, plummeted. So that affected everybody everywhere, not just here.
This is all you.
The long-term compensation rates and financial planning. When I came before you, I believe it was in late February, early March. This was something that the council made quite clear that they needed to see if we were going to discuss rates in the future. We have a consultant on board now. We went through the RFP process, And they're helping us develop a long-term financial plan as well as long-term compensation rates, as well as long-term rates that we should be applying. It's going to be a big help. It's a first step. We've also in the process of an RFP. We're reviewing it now for a financial advisor, a legal financial advisor that can actually help us move the money around, so to speak, and develop bonds and this type of thing that we're gonna need. So it's a two-prong attack. The information will be intertwined, but it's something we really need, and I'm glad we're doing it. It's money we don't necessarily want to spend, but it's a need. So we wanted to update you on that. They're going to be a huge help in our capital planning. Because most of our machinery is so unique, it's expensive. And it works in tough environment. Not all of them have been proven 100%. They're always developing and improving these type of machineries, but it's quite expensive. And in the past, evidently, there wasn't the long-term replacement schedule that we need for these pieces of machinery that are $500,000 to $1 million. So once again, the consultants are going to help us get there. And in conclusion, we just want the council, as well as the general public, to know that we want to work with the city, we want to work with the county to develop efficient and safe collection, disposal, and recycling services for both homes and businesses. We want to expand. There's so much we could do here in Moab. We might not be able to do it overnight by any means, but we can take steps to improving what we have. We hope to educate the public with streamlined, accurate, and moderate and modern information. And hopefully the public will learn to understand our services and hopefully fully appreciate the diligent work of all of our personnel.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Sorry.
You're rubbing off on people. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes.
I had two quick ones. The slide was quick, so just to make sure I saw it right. So is the expectation that the consultant work will be done at the end of this year? Was that what I saw?
The initial one, we haven't, the actual legal financial advisor. We are actually reviewing the three finalists as we speak, so we don't have a timetable on that.
Okay.
But that I am going to push and hopefully have the same time frame. I just can't guarantee it yet because we obviously haven't chosen them.
Okay. And then obviously from your stats from other places, we know about our volume compared to other places, and we know about, economies of scale. But of course, people go places like Junction and they see things, they eye and say, I wish we had that. So here's one of those questions. And I don't know how practical it would be from a personnel perspective, but given that you guys are now able to take e-waste and household hazardous waste on a daily basis, do you ever think it would ever make any sense? I think one of the things the Mesa County solid waste has is sometimes when they collect household hazardous waste, they actually sell back some of that to the public, at a discounted rate because it's, a partial container. And I have no idea what Utah standards are, for that compared to Colorado. But do you guys think that would ever make sense or not really? It just adds work.
As far as
Yeah.
household hazardous waste,
Yeah.
I've been meaning to get over there and
Yeah.
see what's going on.
Yeah.
But the thing that you could reuse the most
Yeah.
would be latex paint.
Okay. Yeah. No, paint is one of the things. And sometimes you see household cleaners or whatever. I don't know.
That type
Yeah.
of material, you run into liability. Oh,
Yeah,
this is just
exactly.
Ajax.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
we
yeah.
don't know that.
Yeah. Okay. No, just interesting. I thought I'd ask.
Okay, any other questions?
I was gonna ask you, I sit on another board and they've seen like huge, just massive increases in equipment purchases and stuff. And I was curious, are you guys seeing the same trend, when you go out to buy a new you know, a garbage truck or whatever, that,
Our price is up.
I mean, up like double what they were 3 or 4 years ago.
I can't say I would go double, but definitely, actually, that picture of that truck is what they call an under CDL. We,
Saw it driving the other day.
it's 11 cubic yards, so you do not need a commercial driver's license. That goes against common history in the industry. A bigger truck, less trips, efficient. But if you don't have a driver for that, well, a lot of people are running into this problem. It's an issue we're never going to get away from here in Moab. But that smaller truck is almost the exact same price as the bigger truck. It's, and that they are, at one time you could get them for under $200,000, and now they're 2.25.
Anything else?
I hope that was what you were looking for, an update on what we've been working on and what we're doing to prepare for the future partnership with the city.
Yep. Is there a chance that we could get that slide deck?
I don't know why not. Yeah.
Yeah, I can send it out to everyone.
Okay, that would be great. Okay, thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving right along. Carly, closeout of fiscal year 22-23 strategic plan.
Wonderful. Let me get my screen up here. It's freezing up a bit. There we go. Okay. Let's do, sorry. The Zoom buttons are like right in the way where I wanted to go. All right. Good evening, council. This is the closeout for the strategic plan for fiscal year 2022 to 2023. This is the first time we've closed out a strategic plan formally like this, at least since I've been here. And I'm proud to do it. It's been a very big year. I want to acknowledge kind of at the front of this that many of the goals and objectives and tasks that we have outlined that we're going to go over are not necessarily conducive to being completed within one fiscal year. And that's either because of schedule, nature of the project, like construction and long-term planning. Those usually take more than a year. Some goals and objectives are never achieved. One that comes to mind is reducing noise impacts. We're always going to be doing that year to year. So I just want to kind of talk to you about what's completed, what we're going to leave in last year, and what we'll be rolling over into the next strategic plan. And I want to, before I dive in, acknowledge that I will be taking on strategic planning from here on out, but a huge lift of it was Ben Billingsley. So this project really does belong to him, and he's done great work on it. When Ben would start or close out projects, he would have like a clever quote from a nice statesman or like a learned scholar. So of course I have Ferris Bueller. It was this, or like a Bugs Bunny quote, but I'm saving that one for later. So life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. This was the theme that came to mind as I prepared this presentation, because I thought back to about 18 months ago when we were meeting in the Mark with Logan Simpson, how different things kind of felt at the city, and the place that the city was in felt very different. So I want to acknowledge just the tremendous work that we as a city team have done in the past year. I'm really proud of the progress we've made on a lot of these. It's a very exciting strategic plan this year. And I think the one for fiscal year 23 and 24, which we will be adopting in the coming weeks, is even more ambitious. So exciting things. Going back to that Logan Simpson facilitated discussion in February of 2021 or January of 2021, we had that facilitation before we completed our visioning process. So the way we organized this strategic plan is different than how we're organizing the next one, which is organized around some pillars, 6 pillars. This had 5 different but related goals in mind. At the time, they called them priorities, but we have called them goals in the strategic plan, and then objectives are nested beneath the goals and tasks beneath the objectives. And from these 5 goals, we came up with 51 discrete objectives. Once that was completed, we built a strategic plan dashboard, which is available still on the city website. This was providing real-time updates on how the city was progressing on these goals and objectives and the different tasks that were outlined. It was organized, the progress was organized into different categories. It could be completed, on track, upcoming, minor disruption, major disruption. I'm not going to talk about a lot of these in those terms just because it's really getting down into some detail, but we can switch over to the strategic plan dashboard if you have questions, or I might know off the top of my head where these things are at. But instead, I'm going to just kind of talk about, what is complete and what we're going to be rolling over, what you will be seeing in the next strategic plan. It just simplifies it a bit. We'll start first with city capabilities. Closing out an evaluation of dispatch, and this 2-step when it comes to dispatch. You'll see that there's a dispatch rollover, but I'll start first with evaluating a lot of the needs that we had with dispatch. We felt like some of the services weren't being provided, and the communication between the city and dispatch could be vastly improved. So we undertook some conversations with Jared, with Jason, with the new sheriff, with some other service providers who were looking for a higher level of service from dispatch. And we produced basically a term sheet for their consideration. And since then, they've built a contract that should be coming my way this week. And that kind of goes to the rollover, which is finally passing an agreement with dispatch between us, the county, and anyone else who wants to participate. Public safety RMS system. This is Spillman, which has been acquired and implemented already and is collecting data and helping provide much more information about our public safety needs. Increasing transparency through community engagement tool. This is that Bang the Table that we acquired, and we're using it for a few of our public engagement initiatives, like big initiatives like Park Master Plan, Water Resource Management Plan. Transitioning from complaint-based enforcement to a proactive engagement. This item kind of underwent some refinement in my mind over the year. Will always be complaint-based because people need an outlet to be complaint-based. But what the code enforcement and code compliance team has done is produced like a calendar of enforcement activities that they want to take. Like for May, it's weeds, and for June, I don't know, it's signs or those kinds of things. So it's a little more proactive in terms of kind of looking out for those kinds of violations, educating the community and providing outreach. Implement translation services. My recollection was that this was related to police department services. It had been marked as completed by the time I got to the dashboard. And just in FYI, for next year, we identified translation services and especially for planning documents, like building code documents being translated into Spanish, so they're available to a wider segment of the community. City staffing levels, this was pretty striking. It was like hire a city manager, police chief, sustainability director, some other really high level positions. Those were all completed. And filling the vacancies in the police department that were especially glaring, like a domestic violence specialist, code enforcement, and I think staffing the police department. As of now, the police department is fully hired.
Fully hired -1.
-1, we're interviewing for code enforcement, that's right, but Leos are fully hired. Still not fully operational because 2 are going to post, and there's a lag between when they're kind of on their own, but very encouraging work by that entire administrative team over at the police department. And finally, streamlining planning department review and approval process. A lot of this was overhauled by the legislature this session. I think it was HB 406 that had a lot of requirements when it came to how many reviews we could have. So that was like statutorily mandated, and we're implementing that now. Rolling over, of course, municipal code rewrite. This has been on the docket for many years. We've budgeted for it again. And one of Michael's marching orders is to get an RFP out so we can get that underway. The dispatch agreement I mentioned earlier, Lisa has approached you about the website redesign. We're in the process of overhauling our website. Regulation of noise impacts was one of those that had a major disruption because of the litigation. One of the tasks was like engaging with local businesses when it comes to outreach. So that had been majorly disrupted. But this will get back on track once we're more fully staffed with police department and fully staffed and all officers of FTO. Consider strategies to improve neighbor to neighbor communications. Part of this was fulfilled with the visioning process. But I think we had in mind incorporating this into a more robust communications plan, which isn't here, but it is in the strategic plan for 23-24. So that will be included in that effort. Last year, we worked with the department and division directors to develop 2 to 3 key performance indicators by division. We'll probably want to do that again this year. It was completed last year, but we'll do it again to just tailor it to the updated strategic plan if necessary. And finally, defining outcomes for recreation programs. A huge part of this is going to be the Parks Master Plan, which will identify outcomes, needs, and a bunch of information about our recreation programming. And that, as you know, is in process. Any questions on city capabilities? No, okay. Great. Next one is housing, which seemed to have the least, this is one of the biggest one in the updated strategic plan. So interesting kind of how things have changed. Happy to close out regulating residential occupancy. And that's a big statement. What we meant in the drop downs was the ADH ordinance that we passed last summer. And at the moment, we had some questions about that land use prioritization list. You might remember that was sort of circulating amongst council about what we would kind of prioritize next. A lot of that got filtered out or settled during strategic planning this year. So I marked that as completed because we have a lot of housing and land use priorities for the upcoming fiscal year, or I guess it's the current one that we're in, the current fiscal year. And that includes something like reviewing the subdivision ordinance to make sure that it's aligning with our goals, updating the PAD, the PUD, considering an overlay approach. So these are rolling over and they were identified as priorities for this current year. Deed restricted properties is a pretty easy task. We just need to prioritize it. And this is just maintaining a public inventory of properties that have deed restrictions or other restrictions for workforce or affordable housing. And then finally, the Walnut Lane redevelopment, which, we're right now negotiating a development agreement with Columbus Pacific, and we hope to have ground broken depending on what the project looks like within a year. Oh, sorry, any questions on housing? I think that's pretty familiar territory for all of us. Sustainability had some of the biggest rollovers, and that's because we didn't have staff in place. Now we have Alexi on board. And then some other priorities I'm recalling kind of popped up that's taking up her time, such as like the landscape ordinance, which wasn't listed, but probably should have been. We've completed a greenhouse gas emission inventory with in our participation in ICLEI and ahead of initiating the sustainability plan. Of course, we did water quality reporting. One of the sections simply said water quality, and one was about reporting, which we did last year. We just completed this year too. We presented on that. And then another component of water quality was kind of dropped down under rolling over for green infrastructure policy, which has a pretty, I know I'm skipping ahead, but a pretty major disruption. We haven't created a policy. However, we do have plenty of green infrastructure capital plans. But we might want to review kind of what we mean by policy and planning as the year progresses. Rolling over fleet policy with electrification consideration. This had several different tasks, and some of them have been completed, like acquiring those, the motorcycles, the electric motorcycles, updating our fleet plan, which we have done. We're exploring EV infrastructure with a RFQ that we talked to you about a few weeks ago. But like coming up with a plan to make our fleet totally electric, that still has not been completed and should be looked at in the next strategic plan. Waste generation too had a huge amount, like it had 6 or 7 pretty meaty topics. It was like examine diversion rates, a lot more education outreach when it comes to recycling, putting together pilot programs. So this one has a major disruption, one because of the sustainability director vacancy and because the solid waste district has had some turnover in leadership, and they have Mike in place again and Jessica there too. So I think we can make a lot of progress on that this year. It'll also be bolstered by the sustainability plan and understanding how much of a priority to make it. We're undergoing the development of the water resource management plan. We love talking about that. That should be complete this fall. Sustainability master plan, too, is well underway. And finally, dark skies compliance. This is, we're looking at an amendment to the current ordinance that has been going through the Planning Commission. It's taken a backseat while the landscape ordinance has been filtered through, but this will be coming to you again in the coming months. And of course, we're going to have to do a huge amount of outreach to businesses and residents when it comes to complying with our dark sky requirements in the coming years. Any questions about what's going on to the strategic plan? Okay. Community investment. We are closing out the community well-being survey. We participated in that, so check that off the list. We spent ARPA money on transitional employee housing, so we fulfilled the community betterment commitment. I broke up revenue enhancement because we have some that were completed and some not, but I want to call them out so you know where they are. We completed the stormwater rate study, stormwater impact fee, as you know. We evaluated property tax during strategic plan, whether we wanted to implement it, and ultimately decided not to. But we are rolling over impact fees for transportation, parks, public safety. Those are underway. And a disproportionate service fee for public safety impacts that we're evaluating. And finally, a comprehensive financial sustainability plan is also in the works. We have a consultant on board who is preparing this information. David Everett is managing that project. Any questions on these items? Great. I can be as detailed as you want on the infrastructure list. This is a pretty substantial list. I also broke it up a little bit just because the list was too long and things got lost, and maybe it was clear that what people can know is actually being constructed at the moment and what we have kind of on the back burner. But of course, we closed out the Mill Creek water line replacement. We will be chip sealing that. It's different than the Mill Creek water line replacement project, different money, different scope of work. But I have a lot of questions about are we just going to leave the road like that? And the answer is no. We're just waiting for the asphalt contractors to be able to construct that, and that should be happening this fall. Spoke about the property tax consideration for fiscal year 24. We're in fiscal year 24. We didn't implement that, so I've closed it out. We are closing out the roundabout because we are not pursuing it any longer due to a doubling in costs for that project. So we can say goodbye to that for now. And of course, we've completed construction on Emmett Boulevard. We will be doing a ribbon cutting on that project in the coming weeks. In progress, we're going to be implementing a lot of the projects from the sewer bond. Birch and Tusher are going to, the construction's imminent. It got delayed slightly, but is in the next few weeks that will be happening. Well 12 construction sort of is on hiatus. The well is constructed, but in the next 2 months, we will be building the structure around the well that helps us access the well. The Pack Creek pedestrian bridge. This is the bridge over by the Episcopal Church. We have grant money and funding for this project. We're just working with property owners on acquiring some easements. The Mill Creek retaining wall repair is very interesting to see if you want to right now over at Woody's. We're doing that right now, and we hope to have that completed by the fall. Of course, we know where Cane Creek Boulevard is. We've got that CIB money. We will be finishing design in October. We will be closing out the CIB loan hopefully by November and starting construction shortly after. The 400 East Bridge widening at Pat Creek. This project is I believe it's a UDOT grant project. We are going out to bid. We are currently out to bid for this one. And finally, NRCS stream bank stabilization projects. These are a lot of flood recovery projects that we're undergoing, like the permanent riprap and other things that need to happen with the stream bank in order to repair it. We just had engineering team had a pre-scoping meeting with the NRCS team. So that will be underway too. And the rest are kind of the rollovers. I don't think we even get to those in the next year, but we will keep them on the list. And we, in fact, have, I think, additional capital projects that we identified in strategic planning. So this will be a much larger list. Any questions on our infrastructure projects? That's a lot. Like, it's pretty great. Like, congratulations for investing, a lot of precious resources on these really important projects. So that is my wrap up of the strategic plan for 22-23. Any thoughts, questions?
That's a lot of good work.
It's a lot.
That's an awful lot of good work.
Yeah.
Like with some of the other
Comments?
slides, can we get a copy of these?
Oh yeah, I'll
cool.
send them this summer, no problem. All right. Well, that's all I needed to share.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Carly. Makes me tired just looking at all.
It's a lot.
Alrighty, we will move on to the general business portion of our agenda. The first item on here is a public hearing for ordinance 2023-11, an ordinance amending Title III of the Moab Municipal Code to update Chapter 3.50, master fee scheduling and modifying certain fees and rates charged by the city. I will open the public hearing at 7:56. Is there anyone from the public that wishes to speak on the fee schedule?
We can also would you like to have a presentation just real quick about the changes? We can do it after too. It's up to you.
I'm not seeing, is there no one that wants to speak on this? Then I will close the public hearing at 7:56. And now consideration of adoption of ordinance 2023-11 and ordinance amending Title III of the Moab Municipal Code to update Chapter 3.50, a master fee schedule and modifying certain fees and rates charged by the city. Marcy.
Hi,
Welcome.
everyone. Let me just share my screen really quick.
And we've got, we had some questions about the fees regarding police department, and then Annie should be on Zoom. I can also, is she not? I'll text her.
Yes, and I forgot my paper, sorry. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to hide the little thumbnail thing on my screen so I can scroll. All right, so this master fee schedule update has police department, the facilities, the rec department, and the Moab Arts Department changes. And Ronnie, thank you so much for pointing those out. I do apologize that those were missed on the master fee schedule
Thanks.
review.
Yeah.
So we'll start with the first questions that came up that Ronnie actually brought up. Is she had some questions about the averaging that we had outlined for the police department, and it looks like Scott Finlayson did respond that the average was between 15 and 20 Utah cities with the fees on that one. So let's see, we have some, I have to find it on here. Okay. So you can see that we have quite a bit of amendments happening to the police department fees. We actually haven't had changes to the police department fees in many, many years. So this is definitely long overdue. And definitely is something that we want to consider for the changes. And given the amount of detail that was provided by the police department for their justifications, if you guys have any additional questions beyond what averaging we used for that, I know that Scott is here to help with any of those questions. Did you guys have questions specific to the police department fees?
I mean, I was just gonna thank you guys and Annie, because I mean, I think I put all my questions on the shared document and I think they all got answered. So I might have one or two just other random general questions, but I'll let these
Okay.
guys weigh in if they have anything.
Awesome. And then we can also review the questions that you had for the Mark. So a couple of the questions that you had that did get answered by Annie, is she on by chance or?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Just in case I don't capture what she had.
Yeah, and I read them all. So I mean, I don't know if anyone other than me was interested. So yeah.
I'm happy to go over them if you guys would
Okay.
like, whatever works for everybody.
I read through them and
Okay,
I think they were answered to me. So
okay,
unless anybody else wants to spend time going out over everyone.
I have one question.
okay.
What's a chicken permit?
Okay, so if you want to have chickens in city limits, you have to get a permit that shows like how your chicken coop's gonna be built, where they're gonna be stored and things of that nature, and then you submit it to the planning department. Or I don't know if it's to the planning department. Okay. Yeah, and they review and approve that, and then also make sure that you're only maintaining the number of chickens, which I think is 12 in city limits, and no roosters. So that's the purpose of the chicken permit, just to make sure that the chickens are being properly taken care of and stored, or like raised.
Homeschooled.
Yeah.
All right,
On the property.
all right.
We don't see a whole lot of chicken permits come through. We have seen, I think, 2 since I've been here, so. Yeah. There may
I
be
didn't know it
others
was a
that are
thing.
on file prior to that, but any new ones, they've only seen 2.
Got a lot of illegal chickens, outlaw chickens.
I was gonna I wondered if there were rogue chicken keepers.
Might have just incriminated myself.
A lot of people I don't think know that the chicken permit is actually required. And I think that this is a good opportunity to note that if you do want to have chickens, or you actively have chickens and haven't done the permitting process through the city, it's super important to do that. Just to prevent any type of violations that could come your way should it be reported.
All right, that was it.
Great. Do we have any other questions?
I think I just felt like I should ask this devil's advocate question. I mean, I know we've tried really hard over the last few years to go back over rates, especially, you know, in situations where we weren't charging the realistic cost of what it was costing, say with an event where, you know, staff are spending a significant amount of time and, you know, that wasn't really being collected. So this is more of a devil's advocate question because I'm pretty sure, you know, this is what we're trying to do here is to raise things, but I'm sure some people could look at this. So it's just a question for them and say, oh, you know, okay, we understand that you guys looked at other communities and averaged them, but, you know, can we as a rural resort community justify being kind of on the high end of the range for some of these? And I guess the way I'm interpreting it is it's probably based on real cost, but just in case there's anything, you know, since you deal with fees and rates all the time, if there's anything else you wanted to say about that, but yeah, maybe needs to be said or.
Can you say what specific, are you talking about like fees, special event fees that are charged by the arts program or?
You know,
special
I
event
think
fees by
the police department was the one that actually gave us averages, right? And maximums. So, you know, that was before I kind of knew, you know, what that was based on, that it was based on 15 or 20 communities. So I'm sure some people might say, oh, you guys are Moab, you know, do you really need to be at the max? But I'm guessing we do because that's probably what it costs, right?
Direct that to Scott.
Yeah. Yeah.
We actually have 35 communities.
Okay. Yeah.
And so there's a high, when you're equating total costs in
Yeah.
say record management, stuff like that, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. For instance, we just dropped how much money on the Spillman system, right? And the camera system. So how do you equate that in dollars back to recouping costs? For instance, redaction on videos, you'll see over the next few years is going to be extremely expensive. So that's one reason we've raised the rates on redaction rates. So for Cindy, for instance, over in records, for just a 15-minute video to redact, it takes 3 to 4 hours of employee time just to redact that. And then we have subscription fees on top of that. to actually have editing powers to actually go in and do that. So it's not just about employees' hourly rate cost to do that. It's the software we have to actually do that. And then the system in which we're holding all that evidence in, and that's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so that's why you're going to see, like, on the redaction side, it's going to be pushed higher on an hourly rate because it is extremely expensive to do that.
Okay, no, thanks. I just thought it was part of our job since, we're playing the role here of raising fees. We should take responsibility for explaining,
Yep.
why. Okay, thanks.
Anybody have anything else? No, Jason?
I don't think so.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
I can move to adopt ordinance 2023-11, an ordinance to remove, add, or amend fees in the Moab Municipal Code, chapter 3.50, master fee schedule.
Okay, I have a motion by Ronnie. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Jason. All in favor? Aye. Motion passes 4-0. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Okay. The next item, 7.3, is consideration of the contract to award rim-to-rim restoration for the Mill and Pack Creek Riparian and Stewardship Plan.
Takes a lot of guts coming back around here, Annie.
I know. I will not tell you the temperature outside.
She's got a lot of nerve. No.
Does Cara have a presentation on this?
I think she's
or-
available for questions if you have them about her scope of work, but it's going to be Annie who's leading the
Oh,
presentation.
okay. I
Yeah.
am sorry, Annie.
Hi, well, good evening. As we all know, the Mill and Pack Creek corridors have been in need of much better proactive management for a while. And this was extremely heightened by the past 2 years of severe flooding. And the city would benefit greatly from professional assistance in looking at all aspects of the corridor management. That's anything from stream bank stabilization to fuels reduction to recreation management. So we publicly bid an RFQ for consultant to serve as a facilitator and a technical advisor in developing and implementing a riparian restoration and stewardship plan. And the scope has 3 main areas. The first is the development of and facilitation of a working group. And this would include all key stakeholders, from partnering agencies to landowners and to others in the community. And the next step would be to identify priority projects and come up with strategies to accomplish those. And then finally to assist in implementing the actual implementation of the projects on the ground. This effort will also include an important education component to help the community understand the complex issues in the corridor management and also have them be better aware of the city's efforts towards that. We received 4 bids and they were all very good proposals. We had an internal team review these proposals and we're recommending rim-to-rim restoration. Their extensive working knowledge of the creeks and existing relationships with the landowners rose them to the top of our recommendations. So with their knowledge and skill set, most of this contract will go towards work on the ground and be the most impactful to the community. A copy of the proposal was included in the meeting packet, so you can see their key milestones and estimated timeline, and you'll notice that a lot of work will begin immediately. So it'll put the city in a much better position to respond to all the future challenges of the creek. And we're very lucky to have them as a local resource.
Hey, thank you, Annie. Does anybody have any question, comment, concern?
I can make a motion.
Be wonderful.
I move to approve a Mill and Pack Creek riparian restoration and stewardship plan contract to rim restoration in the amount of $50,000.
Okay, motion made by Ronnie. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Luke. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 4-0. Thank you, Annie.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
Uh-huh. All right, moving right along. City manager updates.
I don't have much this week. Just a reminder that the Utah League of Cities and Towns event. It's the annual conference. One's the mid-year, and I think this is the annual. The annual is The registration is open for that up in Salt Lake City, September 6th through 8th, I believe. Please reach out to Sasha if you want to register and if you want to attend. Also, the Mountain Towns meeting is also open for registration. It is in October, 1 sec. October like 16th, 17th, and 18th. It's taking place in Vail. We're a kind of adopted member of that organization. They have, I think, 2 meetings. There's the CAST event, and then there's the Climate Solutions event. They're both very worthwhile. If you don't get those emails, please let me know. And if you're interested, we're happy to send you along. I know Ronnie, Keelan, and I have been in the past. And we find it really valuable. I'll be going to the Climate Solutions, and so will Lexi. And that's all I have for council updates. Pretty short one.
Okay, alrighty, council reports. Luke.
I don't think I have too much. I was out on vacation and kind of came back to the heat, so just readjusting.
Okay. Ronnie.
Okay, I'm going to apologize because I have a lot. I will try and just hit the highlights for you guys because all of these meetings had a lot going on, a lot of great information. So we had our Moab Tailings Pile Steering Committee meeting today. Let me just, every year, they give us an updated document there's a conditional use permit with the county, which Department of Energy doesn't have to do, but they do voluntarily. And every year there's an annual statement of continued compliance in which they update what's been happening in the last year. So just to hit a few ones for you guys who may not be involved in the project all the time. Let's see. To date, the project has shipped more than 13.7 million tons, about 86% of the total pile. Let's see. Last December, we were again granted $67 million for the project for this running year. You might remember in one of the last reports, we were talking about one of the next things that they had to do at the project was they have these old autoclaves that were buried at the project site, and they had no idea what was going to happen. There are 14 of them when they dug them up, and what kind of nightmare it might be to potentially move them. But that actually that work began in April of 2023. They finished in June. It went really well. They said the first few that they dug out were clean. Then they started finding ones that actually had asbestos debris in them. And so all of the debris has been moved to Crescent Junction. The actual remaining metal will be moved soon. Let's see, they're continuing to ship 4 trains a week. Let me just see. I could go, frankly, on and on because there's so much, but I don't know if you guys want to get details on, groundwater, how many pounds of ammonia and uranium have been moved, but just see me if you want to go into great detail. There were some questions about flooding. They were talking to us today about, they did turn off the pump circuit because when the river comes up, sometimes the river fills the role of actually delivering fresh water to the lower end of the site to deplete ammonia in the same way that the pumps do. So, but there was no flood water or rising water that reached the contamination area. The cover that they want to put at Crescent Junction, they have to keep working with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission on advancing designs for that plan. So they're now at the 90% plan, and hopefully that will be approved soon. The project currently employs 141 people, and they're anticipating that staffing to stay the same for some time to come. I think the mayor had wondered when they might experience a reduction in staff, but it'll be a while till things change. Let's see, maybe I will leave it at that. But anyway, just know there's a lot more. And if you want to know more, let me know. Let's see, I missed the July 6th Grand Water and Sewer Service Agency meeting, and July 20th, instead of having a standard meeting, there was a special one. And as you guys may recall, Grand Water and Sewer Service Agency is made up of some different components: the Spanish Valley Water and Sewer Improvement District, the Grand County Water Conservancy District, and the Grand County Special Service Water District. And so the Water Conservancy District, which I'll just refer to make it faster as WCD, they unfortunately lost a board member who passed away. And so that seat needs to be filled. And so as part of that process, there were ads in the paper whereby people could apply, and the governor actually has to approve this seat. So just to give you guys an update so you know what's happening, and they received 9 applicants, and there was a bit of, I'm going to say disagreement, but maybe misunderstanding about process. The WCD was thinking they just made the recommendations to the governor and it went from there. The Grand County Commission was thinking, no, I think you recommend to us and we make the appointment or the recommendations to the governor. So anyway, they're hashing that out, but my understanding is it will be the commission that makes a recommendation. They send 3 names up to the governor. So I think they'll let us know when that's happening. There's another special meeting about this on Wednesday. I don't know how many of you were able to attend the Utah League of Cities and Towns water workshop that they offered. It was one of their lunch meetings on July 19th. It's actually up on YouTube if you want to watch it after the fact. But I was just going to point out to you guys, if you didn't listen, that there was involvement from, one second, no. Thank you. Okay. The Division of Water Resources, the Division of Drinking Water, and the Division of Water Quality. And it's pretty fascinating. And I'm sure it would be easier for Carly to boil down how much, actually applies to us. But they had a great summary of legislation and some of the carrots and sticks the legislature came up with, and how, those of us who aren't involved with the Great Salt Lake still have what expectations are still following on us that might have to do with melding, say our planning efforts with our water conservation. There is a great section on incentives, incentivizing people to use less water, and some great statistics on comparatively how many acre feet of water you could save per $1 million invested if you tried different things. So like putting in the smart controllers that we talked about earlier tonight, or landscaping rebates. They talked a little bit about turf replacement. So the list is very interesting, because I think the 2 things that come out the highest for your best bang for your buck, if you have $1 million, but comparatively, are the smart controllers and secondary metering. The turf replacement actually comes down lower. And there's just so many good websites on there, things that we may not all have been aware of either on the council or in the community. UtahWaterSavers.org is currently offering 2 rebates statewide. One is for toilet replacement upgrades to higher efficiency, and one is for smaller controller rebates. They are starting a new nonprofit called Utah Waterways, which will have a board, and apparently will be helping communities communicate about water conservation, water quality, water use. So they are going to be available to help communities. So much in here. I'll try to skip a little bit, but just some other interesting things without going through all of them that drinking water, the Division of Drinking Water hit on that I thought were interesting, was they just have a fair amount of grant funds available that we might look into. Some of them are for larger communities, but some are if you are providing for less than 10,000 people or less than 3,000 people. So very interesting there. And then just some other interesting things. EPA is going to be requiring all community systems to complete an initial lead service line inventory by October of 2024. So there are monies available to help you with your inventory or potentially replacements that need to be happening. And EPA is also in the process of drafting maximum contaminant levels for what they call forever chemicals, or PFAS or PFOAs. I'm not even sure how you spell that, but the state will also be available to help communities that have that serve less than 3,300 people. I'm not sure the city how many we're providing for, what our total is. But it sounded like there are definitely some freebies available to help you do your initial assessment to see if you're going to have an issue and then to help you cover things. So it goes on and on from there, but that gives you guys a sampling. We had a Southeast Utah Riparian Partnership, used to be known as the Tamarisk Coalition meeting on July 18th. In which there were a lot of updates from BLM, Fire, Forestry and State Lands, National Park Service, the Forest Service, Rim to Rim Restoration, Grand County Weed Department on just great on the ground restoration that's happening, either just in the vegetation mode, or there's actually a project happening out by New Rapid. For those of you who love the daily, some of these projects are benefiting aquatic wildlife as well. So you can always go to them to get details there. One of the things they talked about at the weed department is just how successful the educational postcards that we all got about Ravenna grass have been, and that a lot of residents have been contacting them, some to tell on their neighbors to get that grass removed. But there are funds for more educational campaigns there. So some of the things that they talked about, and some of this is amusing, that they might be looking at doing coming up are postcards on the Play Clean Go campaign, which we've talked about before, which is to encourage people to learn about non-native species and how you might unknowingly, or your dog, be transporting weed seed on your shoes, and how it can be useful to use a boot brush. So we'll be seeing those boot brushes around soon through the Park Service. Probably a postcard about Russian olive and tamarisk removal, and that, at the right time to remove those, reminders about weed control, when it's a good time to mow down things like cheatgrass, just because of our elevated concerns about fire. And one of my favorite suggestions was about a reminder about goat heads. And I have to credit Johnny Jew at I think he's still at BLM, but he might be at Fire, Forestry and State Lands now, because he did bring up the good point that regardless of a lot of our other feelings in the community, we are all probably united in our hatred of the goat head. So perhaps we can have a campaign in that goat head eradication. Let's see, there is, you guys have probably seen it in the newspapers. Grand County is sponsoring an educational workshop called Water 101 with well-known players, Mark Stilson and Arnie Holtquist. I volunteered to help them get the word out a little bit. So that will be tomorrow night, Wednesday, July 26, 6 p.m. at USU. You can join by Zoom or at USU and ask any and all questions, just to get educated about the basics of our watershed, where our surface and groundwater comes from, basics about water rights, and because we know all of us are learning, and some people like a repetition too. Let's see. The only other things that we're going to add was Mary McGann today at the UMTRA meeting asked that I publicly thank Luke here for writing his article in the Salt Lake Tribune about in response to Michael Liss's letter about arches and canyonlands and the timed entry. So thank you, Luke. And I was just going to ask, because of what Shar was saying, if maybe in the future we could have an update from Richard about Matt, just because it's been a while and it might be interesting to hear about ridership and who's using what. And that was it.
We'll do that 6 months in.
Okay,
So
cool.
we have like a full half
Yeah, the
year.
seasons. Okay,
Mhm.
great.
Thank you, Ronnie. Jason.
All right. When we were doing pickleball, we were talking about doing pickleball. I had a resident tell me that the only thing that pickleball did was unite the right and the left.
Oh,
I think the same can be said about goat heads.
can you imagine if you played in goat heads? Yeah, everyone would be happy.
Goat heads unite everybody. I just got a few things to go over. I attended an airport board meeting, which still is a hot topic is the EAS contract and what is going on with that. And it sounds like the contract is going to be going with Contour Airlines, who will be flying to Phoenix. United Airlines has given a verbal commitment to stay until Contour is up and running, which is probably looking like October, November and stuff. So there will be some flights. They give a commitment to stay. I don't think anyone knows what that commitment entails. If it's going to be, I think probably the Salt Lake flight will go away, and the Denver flight will probably stay, sadly. But we don't really know. The airport, I was just looking at this, the airport has made a recommendation to the county commission to name, they have a new operations building up at the airport. And one of the things that they're trying to do is they're going to dedicate the new operations building to Bill Groff. So, which is really good, you know, which is pretty amazing. Bill Groff's been pretty key in aviation over the last, 30, 40 years and stuff. So that goes before the commission next week. We need to see that happen. Couple other things. Attended a Grand County Emergency Medical Services Special Service District meeting. Ronnie can fill in if I forget anything, which I probably will. We did have an audit, and the audit committee found that the district is in good standing and does a great job of keeping track of things. We did have a meeting at our last meeting. We had a medical director who is out of Wasatch County, is where our medical director is from, and he kind of oversees everything. And he kind of came down and he gave kind of the state of Moab, and it was pretty neat. He actually is a medical director for about 3 or 4 different agencies, and he brought the fact, he goes that Grand County is consistently looked upon to see what we're doing in as far as emergency medical services district goes, because we have such a vast array of services that we provide that people look to us because they consider us one of the top-notch agency in the state of Utah, and if not even the West, you know, and stuff about, because we do so many varied calls, you know, from high angle rope rescues to cardiac arrests, you know, in town and stuff. So it was pretty interesting to hear his comments about how good our agency is here, and we are lucky to have what we have. We met with the emergency coordinator, who is the emergency coordinator for EMS and in the fire department. There's been a lot of grants that are available, but the one thing that they found is that grants are getting to be incredibly competitive. You know, everybody's put in for grants, and it's affecting things, you know, like I brought up for ambulances. Ambulances have doubled in price in the last 3 or 4 years, and while ambulances have doubled in price, the fees by which the state said that we can collect for emergency services have not gone up in, you know, at the same rate, you know, and stuff. So there's still some issues with the funding for things like EMS, and that. We spent some time again talking about dispatch. There is been a little bit of gain, a little bit of a lot of they're kind of feeling that they're having some better relationships with dispatch, but also there needs to be some issues fixed as far as back end, such as software, kind of computer issues, and that they're kind of starting to work through, which still is some concern, which I think we're trying to nail down and see what we can figure out. The director report for EMS, which I don't know if this flows same with the city kind of in tax revenues, but the taxes that the EMS revenues have generated are down 11% from last year, and which I imagine it probably falls in the same line as sales tax. I could be wrong. And then so it'll be interesting to see kind of where that ends up, but that is some concern there. And EMS is also, they're doing a great job of really putting a lot of efforts towards mental health of the public service industry stuff, which has been really great to see. I think that's all I have. I don't know if I forgot anything, but with that, that's all I have.
Thanks, Jason. And I can't remember when we met last time, so I know I did go to a Canyonlands Healthcare Special Service District meeting, and we are our audit just has not been completed and returned to us, but we are doing the same process. The We had a letter from a resident asking us to remove 2 elm trees on the district's property, which is the property between like the park neighborhoods and the hospital, because she knew that those 2 trees were causing her elm seed bug infestation. So if we cut those down, that would all go away. But we opted not to because we are looking at developing that property. And so more than two trees likely would have to come out. So hopefully we can move forward with that. And I think that's all I have. And we still do need to do
Just one
a
close
short
second. Just the
executive
litigation.
session. Okay, do I have a motion to go into executive session?
I'll make a motion to go into executive session.
Motion by Jason. Do I have a second? Seconded by Luke. All in favor?
Do you need us to expressly
Yeah, would
say
you-
why?
Yeah. Do you
Oh.
mind amending the motion to say?
Oh, I'm
for-
sorry.
What
The-
is the motion?
For
The
litigation. yeah.
Litigation.
It's,
Sorry, Jason.
All right, yeah, make a motion to go into closed session to discuss reasonably imminent or pending litigation.
Thank you.
Second. Okay. Amended motion made by Jason and seconded by Luke. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 4-0.
This is 2 minutes.
Okay.